It's schedule release day in the NFL. What should we be watching for as the Jets schedule comes out? Let's discuss today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Wednesday, May 15th, 2024, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Subscribe to the show for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get episodes as soon as they're posted. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out and helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Well, today the NFL schedule comes out. Officially, the schedule is set to be released at 8 p.m. Eastern time. We will find out the dates and times of the remaining 16 Jets games. Yesterday, the NFL announced the Jets' first game of the season will be against the San Francisco 49ers on Monday Night Football Week 1. So this has become a big deal in the NFL. The NFL likes to hype up the schedule release. Why do they like to hype up the schedule release? I'm not entirely sure. I'm guessing it has something to do with not much else going on around this time of year. You know, the draft is over, free agency is mostly over. There's not much to discuss. So the NFL, I guess, has to pretend the schedule release is a big deal. I mean, do we have all this hype around baseball releasing their schedule? Do we have all this hype around basketball releasing its schedule? When the NHL releases its schedule, is it that big of a deal? No. Here's the other thing. We know every single game that will be played. We know which teams are playing. We know where the games will be played. Really, all they're announcing are the dates and times of these games and the networks the games will be broadcast on. Yet the NFL decided to turn this into a big deal. They've decided to hype this thing up. And I think there are certain takeaways you can have. And we'll discuss these takeaways on the show today and tomorrow. I think, there are certain things you can say about the schedule. But I mean, ESPN 2 is having a 2-hour special tonight at 8 p.m. Now, I know exactly what you're thinking. 2 hours. That's not enough time. How will I know that the 49ers Chiefs rematch in the Super Bowl is a big deal with only 2 hours? Well, rest assured, NFL Network has you covered because NFL Network is not taking any chances. They have a 3-hour special now this is the third straight year they've done this. 3 hours to break down the schedule because how would you know Week 1 Chiefs Ravens would be a big deal without Peter Schrager telling you, wow, this is a big game? Don't worry, NFL Network has you covered. NFL Network's also bringing back Good Morning Football, off hiatus just for schedule release day. So don't worry. In case you weren't sure that these playoff rematches were big games, you will be able to hear that directly from the experts at NFL Network. Now, of course, I'm joking right now because this thing has gotten out of control. And of course, there are things you can look to when we talk about the schedule. It's just the NFL has taken the hype around this event, which is not as big of a deal as they make it out to be, and it turned it into something as significant as the playoffs or the combine or the draft. It's just it's a little overboard, if you ask me. Now, of course, we do have the Jets' first game of the season. They are heading out to San Francisco to play the 49ers. And it's on Monday Night Football. And the first thing I'm going to be looking for on the schedule when it's released, and it very well could leak through the day. We very well could know the Jets schedule before 8 p.m. Eastern tonight. And that's, of course, when the extravaganza begin on ESPN2 and NFL Network. I'm sure you'll be glued to your seat for 3 hours to get all the breakdowns on what's happening there. And last night there actually is somebody who claimed that he has the Jets schedule. So we'll see whether or not that's accurate. But through the day, the schedule will leak. And I'll tell you, the first thing I'm looking at is who the Jets get week 2. And this is for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that the Jets have that trip to San Francisco to play the 49ers. So first of all, it's a long trip. Second of all, it's against a team that we think is probably going to be good. And one of the challenges with schedule release day is every year there's about 50% turnover in the teams that make the playoffs. So the teams that made the playoffs last year, they're not always good this year, and vice versa. The teams that were bad last year They aren't always bad this year. Sometimes they improve. This time last year, everybody was looking to the game against the Houston Texans in 2023 as like an easy game for the Jets. Of course, as it turned out, Houston ended up being a good team, and the Jets still won the game anyway. So again, this shows you the value in placing too much emphasis on schedule release day. But I think we can say that, the 49ers, this is a team that's loaded with talent. This is a team that's at least made the conference championship game for the last 5 seasons. This is a team that we can expect to be very good. And even if they're not very good, it's probably going to be because they suffered a million injuries during the season, and they probably won't have a million injuries during week one. If the 49ers have a season that goes sideways, it'll probably happen later in the season. It'll probably won't happen week one. So a long trip, a tough game against San Francisco, and also a short week coming up because you're playing on Monday Night Football, which means, of course, you have one less day to prepare, and it just kind of throws your schedule out of whack. I mean, most NFL teams, Monday is a day where players come in and recover, and they kind of go over what happened in the previous game. Tuesday is the day where the coaching staff cooks up the game plan, and they install it Wednesday and Thursday, and then Friday maybe a lighter day where they finish installing it. Your schedule just gets thrown out of whack when you're playing on Monday Night Football. So there are a couple of things you have to look for week two, and I think the first is you hope that the Jets are at least at home on week two, because you don't want to have to travel back-to-back weeks, especially when it's just one of those things that it makes the week even tougher when you have to travel after a short week. So you hope that the Jets are at home. I think another thing I'd be watching for is you hope it's not like one of the projected tougher opponents, because now again, it's difficult to say which teams are going to be good and which teams are going to be bad. But I think that there are certain teams, again, you have a sense that they're probably going to be pretty tough, and if they're not tough, week two is still too early to know that. There are teams that are expected to be good that are very good week one, and they suffer a lot of injuries through the season. Then you get them like maybe week 15, they're not as tough. You hope it's not one of the tougher matchups. So who would the tougher matchups be? I guess it would be some team like Buffalo, or maybe it's a team like Miami. Your divisional rivals. I think you'd like to avoid that. I think you'd like to see one of the softer teams on the schedule, heading into week two. And that's because, as I mentioned yesterday, week one in some ways is kind of beneficial for the Jets kicking off against San Francisco, because nobody's really expecting you to win that game. And, look, half the league starts 0-1 every season. Hey, the Kansas City Chiefs won the Super Bowl. They started 0-1 last year. It's not the end of the world to start 0-1, but it becomes much tougher if you start 0-2. So I'd like to, if the Jets are going to start in San Francisco, I think there are benefits to that, because I think like it will prevent you from panicking if you start 0-1. If you get off to a rough start, it's not the end of the world, but you definitely don't want to start 0-2. And, everybody can say, well, who cares? Jets have talent. There's a reason that a low percentage of teams that start 0-2 eventually make the playoffs. And reasons for that are much more tangible than you realize. People say, well, it doesn't matter what happened in the past. Well, it matters what happened in the past, because it shows you how tough it is. If you start 0-2, let's say you need to win 10 games to make the playoffs. Let's say you need to go 10-7 to make the playoffs. You go 0-2, you start 0-2, you need to go 10-5 the rest of the way to win 10 games. So essentially, you need to play 67 ball the rest of the way. That's not easy to do. Whereas if you start 2-0, you just need to win 8 of your last 15 games. You essentially need to be a team that's a little bit better than 500. You start 0-2 to the last 15 games. You need to be a little bit better than 500 to win 10. That's the reason these first couple games do matter, because they still count on the standings. So I think you'd like to avoid a tough second game for the Jets, and ideally it'd be a home game. Ideally your home opener is week 2, and I think that's fair. I think it's tough to have a team begin the season week 1 on the road Monday night and then ask them to not have their home opener week 2, ask them to travel again week 2. We'll see what happens, though. I mean, some of the early leaks have suggested the Jets may be on the road week 2. I've seen a couple of suggestions that Tennessee could be the place they go, which would not be which would be a road game, but it would not be what would project to be one of the tougher games. So we'll see what happens on that front. And of course, there are some other things we should look for on the Jets schedule as we continue here on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Jets. We'll talk about some of the other things to watch as the Jets schedule comes out tonight, 8 p.m. Eastern, 2-hour special ESPN2, 3-hour special NFL Network. Locked On Jets on Wednesday. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own because right now new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. I know if you're a Knicks fan, you're probably feeling a lot better today than you did yesterday. You probably breathed a big sigh of relief after the way the Knicks played last night. Knicks were winners. Will the Rangers win Game 6 in Carolina to advance to the Eastern Conference Finals? Will the Knicks beat the Pacers in Game 6 to advance to the Eastern Conference Finals in the NBA? Well, those teams could be winners. You could also be a winner at FanDuel because, again, you get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. Again, it's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day. A big shout out to you every dayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets. We're talking about the Jets schedule release today, 8 p.m. Eastern time is the official time where it will come out, but there may be leaks through the day. We may know the full Jet schedule by the time 8 p.m. Eastern rolls around. Talking about what we should look for. Now, usually on Wednesdays, we do our weekly mailbag show. We're going to push it to Friday this week because of the NFL schedule release. What are some things we should look for in the Jets schedule? I just talked about some of the things to watch for in week 2. And something I said kind of applies for the rest of the season. I think you want to avoid road games on short weeks. It's one of those things that I don't know if at the end of the day, it's going to make or break the Jets season if you have a bunch of road games on short weeks. And look, the Jets with Aaron Rodgers at quarterback are probably going to play their fair share of nationally televised games. They're probably going to get their fair of primetime games. And that means, you have Monday night games. And that means Monday night, of course, means you play on a short week. And the Jets, like every team, will play a Thursday night game. I think that the week after the Monday night game and the Thursday night game, these are games you hope are at home. And I think that's especially true of the Thursday night game. I think these are just standard best practices for like the schedule release, like what to watch for. The Thursday night games, so tough because I laid out for you in the first segment what a typical NFL week looks like for a team. Now, imagine compressing that into 3 days, compressing 5-6 days of work into a 3-day period, and players will tell you they're not fully recovered by Thursday for another game. So you don't want to add like travel to that because if you have to travel the day before the game, it cuts into your preparation. And teams have a tough time preparing for these Thursday night games. And look, if it was up to me, I would get rid of Thursday night football. But the players and owners want the money, so they're rolling forward with Thursday night football. It's always tough. Those games are always tough, but it's even tougher when you have to play them on the road. I'd much rather have a Thursday night game at home. And any additional Monday night games the Jets have, I would hope after them they have short weeks ahead of them. I think there are some other things you want to avoid. I think you always want to avoid when you're in the AFC East. You want to avoid a September game in Miami. That's because it's still summer in Miami. I mean, the summers in Miami can be rough. I think that's a pretty obvious statement. I don't think you need a meteorology degree to understand that you don't want to be in Miami during the summer if you can avoid it. Well, the summer in Miami extends into September, October. In New York, by the time you get to the middle of September, you start getting those crisp autumn days. Maybe there's a hot day or two that remains, but it's not that bad in New York in September. In Miami, you still get very, very hot, very, very humid days. It's kind of a double whammy. When you play like those first couple weeks of the season in Miami, players aren't completely in game shape yet. Players are obviously in tremendous condition, but there's a difference between just being in good shape in general and being in football shape. And those early games in Miami take a toll on players because teams don't really play their big guys much in the preseason anymore. And that's really the only way you can get into football shape because practices don't involve much hitting these days. Something the players negotiated with the owners. The players did not want a ton of hitting in practice anymore. So the owners, agreed that they were going to limited padded practices. So the only way to get into shape now, football shape, is to play games. And teams don't really play their starters much in the preseason because they're so afraid of injury. So this leads to this situation. And this is, I think, part of the reason, I mentioned this yesterday. Week 1 has some very strange results. If you look at a typical season, there's always like some team that ends up being really good that gets crushed by a team that's really bad. And I think this has something to do with it. I think that's why there are so many wild upsets week 1 compared with the rest of the season. So I think you don't want to add to that variable by going down to Miami because any game you watch in Miami, you'll see in the fourth quarter, if it's a competitive game, players from the road team are going to start cramping up because of the heat and the humidity. They'll start dehydration will start setting in. It's a tough place to go. Miami's a beautiful place to go in December or January. So I think we're talking about for the players getting a little break from the cold of the winter as much as anything. But you want the Miami game to be late in the season. And of course, when you're the Jets, you're kind of hoping that the cold weather games will happen against teams that play in domes or teams from warm weather cities. So you want to see the Dolphins in December, January. Now, of course, last year the Jets got the Dolphins on Black Friday. It didn't go very well. So climate only means so much, but these are things that I think can be significant. I think you also, again, want to see the quote unquote tough games kind of spaced out. And you could go either way on this. I always used to say I wanted the easy games for the Jets all lined up at the beginning so they can get on a little bit of roll and build some confidence. Well, that happened in 2022. And then the back part of the schedule was really tough and the Jets faded down the stretch. So, it shows you that it's difficult to really say when your tough games are ideal. But when we talk about teams like Buffalo or Miami, you want those games spaced out a little bit. You don't want. I would prefer not to have a ton of back-to-backs against those teams and some of the other tough teams on the Jets schedule. And the last thing, I say this every year, I think it's true, is for me, the best point for the bye date is as late as possible. And the reason I say that is just because of how physical of a game football is. And if you ask players, and they will all tell you that, by the time you get to the end of the season, everybody's playing hurt. Everybody's banged up a little bit. Nobody's 100% healthy. It's just a grind. Week after week, you play this physical game over the course of 17 weeks. It's 16 or 17 games in 18 weeks. It's just really, really tough. It's really tough on these guys' bodies. And if you get a little week off, you get a little refresher late in the season, that's the type of thing that can make a difference. Now, you don't really know how your season is going to play out. There have been seasons where the Jets have gotten an early bye week that's really benefited them. I mean, I think back the 2015 season, the Ryan Fitzpatrick season with Brandon Marshall and Eric Decker. The Jets had a lot of their key players get injured the first couple weeks of that season, and their bye came early. Their bye came week 5 because they played a London game week 4. And that ended up coming at the perfect time for that team. If that team had a later bye, they may have been less successful because they had so many early injuries, that week 5 bye ended up being perfect. The key players could get healthy. Even guys who were playing were kind of banged up. They weren't at 100%. So I say that with the caveat that you don't know when the key players are going to be injured. It may be ideal. And this is part of the reason the schedule release is so overrated, because there's so much you don't know about what's ideal for your team. But I think generally speaking, the later the bye you can get, the better. Now, hey, during the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about the opponents the Jets face. You may be wondering, how did the Jets end up playing against these teams? Well, there's a very simple formula, and you can actually know most of the Jets opponents from now until the end of time. And I'll explain to you how the Jets got these 17 opponents as we continue here on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Gametime. With killer last-minute deals, all in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying NFL tickets. It's super easy to use. You just open the app, a couple of clicks, and you've got a great deal. And you can also see the view from your seat before you buy, so there are no surprises once you get to the stadium. And of course, it's NFL schedule release day, so you might be trying to figure out which Jets games you want to go to. I mean, do you want to see Geno Smith return to MetLife Stadium and face the Jets when the Seattle Seahawks come to town? Do you want to see the Jets against division rivals like Buffalo or Miami? Do you want to see C.J. Stroud come to town with the Houston Texans? Or maybe you want to go to a road game. Maybe you want to head out to Jacksonville to see the Jets take on Trevor Lawrence. Or maybe you want to head down to Miami. If the Jets get one of those December, January games, Miami would be a great place to go. Well, no matter which Jets game you want to see, you can find it on Gametime. I've used Gametime myself. You can get last-minute deals, save up to 60% for buying last-minute tickets to sports, concerts, comedy, and theater. So you can get your NFL tickets early, but you also, if you want to go see the Knicks or Rangers play in their playoffs, Gametime is the place to be. Just so many great deals. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. It's one word with no space. LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Wednesday. The NFL schedule will officially be announced 8 p.m. tonight. Of course, the schedule for the Jets could leak at various points through the day. The thing about the schedule release day is we already know the 17 opponents the Jets will face, and we already know whether they're going to be home games or road games. Now, I guess if the Jets play like one of the international games, if the Jets get sent to London or like one of the other international cities, maybe we don't know the venue, but we know the home opponents and we know the road opponents for the New York Jets this season. And this is a season where the Jets will play 8 home games and 9 road games. The even number years, the NFC teams get 9 home games. The odd number years, the AFC teams get 9 home games. So more road games than home games this year for the Jets. Now you may be wondering, how did the Jets get these 17 games? And in all honesty, the NFL has a formula. It's actually a very simple formula. And once you know this formula, you actually know 14 of the 17 opponents the Jets will have every year from now until the end of time, or at least now until the NFL changes its formula. Now, every year, 6 of the games are against your divisional opponents. You play home games and road games against the 3 teams in your division. So home against Buffalo, Miami, New England, on the road against Buffalo, Miami, and New England. The Jets also play all 4 teams from one of the other divisions in the AFC. And this year, that division is the AFC South. So the Jets play at home against the Houston Texans and Indianapolis Colts. They play on the road against the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Tennessee Titans. And you may be wondering why this is. You may be saying, "Well, gee, why did the Jets get these opponents?" Well, they rotate the other 3 divisions in the AFC every single year. So last year it was the AFC West. The year before it was the AFC North. There's essentially a 3-year rotation. And the last time the Jets had the AFC South, they got Jacksonville and Tennessee at home, and they got Houston and Indianapolis on the road. So it flips this time. So that's how you get those 4 games. You also play the entire division you also play an entire division from the NFC. And this year the Jets play the NFC West. So they get the Rams and the Seahawks at home. They get the Cardinals and the 49ers on the road. And why is that? Well, the last time the Jets played the NFC West, they went on the road against the Rams and the Seahawks. And the Rams game was very famous because that was the Jets' first win in 2020, which took them out of the Trevor Lawrence sweepstakes and got them Zach Wilson. They played on the road in 2020 against the Rams and the Seahawks the last time the NFC West was in the rotation. And they played at home against the Cardinals and the 49ers. So that flips, this time. And again, there's a rotation that happens in the NFL. Last year, the Jets played the NFC East. So, essentially every 4 years, you get one of the other divisions. You get one of the divisions in the NFC. And again, it just rotates year by year. The Jets also play 2 games from the other 2 divisions in the AFC. And essentially what happens is the division you're not playing, you play one division. The other 2 divisions, you play the team that finished in the same spot of you in the standings last year. So last year, the Jets finished 3rd place in the AFC behind Buffalo and Miami ahead of New England, which means that the Jets are not playing. The Jets are playing the 4 teams from the NFC South. They are not playing the AFC West. They're not playing the AFC North. So that means that the Jets get the 3rd place team from those 2 divisions. The Denver Broncos were the 3rd place team in the AFC West. Jets get them at home. The Steelers were the 3rd place team from the AFC North. Jets get them on the road. And again, last time we went through this cycle, the Jets played last time the Jets played the AFC South. They got the team from the same finish in the division last year, the West on the road and the North at home. So this year they get the West team at home and the North team on the road. And then there's the 17th game. And essentially the 17th game is always an NFC team. And again, it rotates division by division. So in 2021, it was an AFC East team. Then, it rotates division by division. It was an NFC East team in 2021, which was the first year of the 17th game. Then we just keep rotating year by year. This year, the NFC North has come up in the rotation, and the NFC North is now the team that this year the Jets face an NFC North team in the 17th game. It's the team that finished in the same spot as them in the standings again. So it's the 3rd place team from the NFC North, which is the Minnesota Vikings. And because it's an even numbered year, the NFC gets the 17th game at home. In odd numbered years, the AFC teams get the 17th game at home. So that's how we got these opponents. We'll find out the order the Jets play them in. We'll find out the times of these games. We'll find out the dates of these games, and we'll find out the networks these games are on tonight or probably through the day. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button or you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your day. Enjoy the 3-hour NFL schedule release. We'll be back tomorrow to talk about the Jets schedule.